Okay, I've been asked a couple of questions by students on how I go about processing my raw images, and particularly how to handle the balance between doing noise reduction and sharpening, at least doing enough sharpening to compensate for the fine detail you lose during noise reduction. So I thought I'd go through this with Lightroom. I'm using Lightroom 6 at the moment, and show you what I do with the raw images. So what I have here is a raw image from an Olympus camera. This is from, I'm not even sure which Olympus. I think it's the EM5. And so I bring the image in, I just import the image into Lightroom. First thing I do is I go over in the develop mode to the camera calibration panel. And if we look in the camera calibration panel, you can see that we're using the 2012 engine, which is the current Adobe color processing engine, but it's set for Adobe standard. First thing I like to do is change that. I've created color profiles for the camera using the Passport Color Checker software, and so I'm going to go down and choose for the Olympus EM5. And basically what that does at best, if I go back out, let me bring up the other panel for a moment. What it does is punches up the blues in the image just a little bit. If you look at the guy's blue jeans, you can see you just get a little darker, intenser blue when I apply that correction. All right. The next thing I do with the Olympus is I go to the lens correction panel, and in the basic panel for lens correction, I turn on the enable profile corrections. Now Olympus is a little different than most cameras, and that for their lenses they have built-in distortion correction profiles that get transmitted automatically to the raw converter. So in this particular case, it senses that I'm using an Olympus camera, an Olympus lens, and it knows how to make the geometric distortion corrections as long as I check that box that says enable profile correction. I don't have to go in and choose the particular lens or whatever. It does it automatically for me. The other thing I do is I do like to turn on the remove chromatic aberration. Olympus lenses are pretty good at not having a lot of chromatic aberration, but on the other hand, they do not correct for it in the camera at all. So for example, if I go to this area in the back, let me blow that up, you can see if I blow that up even a little bit more, you can see that we've got some chromatic aberration going on where this light edge meets the dark speaker, or the dark what the hell is it? Podium in the background. So if you watch as I turn on the remove chromic aberration, you notice that does a pretty good job of getting rid of the chromic aberration. So one of the things that Adobe does well. Okay, let me go back out into the general image again. Okay, so the next thing I have to do at this point, now this image was shot at 800 ISO, which doesn't generate a lot of noise. There's no flash used here. It's handheld and at 1/80th of a second, so not the sharpest of conditions, and shot at 14 millimeter, which is 28 millimeter on a full frame camera. So we're shooting with a wide angle lens, and we're shooting relatively slow in mixed lighting and not very good lighting. But overall the image doesn't look that bad as a starting raw image. Now, if I go into the detail panel, the detail panel has two sets of settings, one for noise reduction and one for sharpening. And the idea here is that we want to first go into the noise reduction settings and remove any noise electronic noise that comes from color noise and any luminance noise that's also generated by the camera. And once we do that, the tendency is that it reduces some of the fine structure. The way noise reduction works is you basically blur the noise out, and when you blur the noise, you're blurring out fine structure that's about the same size. So you've done both. You basically have blurred the image to get rid of the noise, and then the idea is to go into the sharpening routine and try to sharpen the details in the image without sharpening the flat areas of the image, like faces and skies that don't really need any sharpening but did need noise removal. Okay, So that's the overall method we're going to use here. Now it's interesting, when we first come into this detail panel, if we were shooting a JPEG images are corrected for sharpening and noise reduction in the JPEG itself. Even if you turn on the camera, if you turn the sharpening down as low as you can and turn the noise reduction as low as you can in the camera, for the JPEGs, the JPEG engine still tends to sharpen and noise correct a little bit more than I think is right or correct. And the result is that if you look around, find the edges, particularly if you're shooting like a tree limb against the sky or a bird against the sky, you can see if you look right at the edge of the bird that often you'll get a little bit of a halo effect, which is a result of basically over sharpening and too much noise reduction. So as a result, I like to shoot both JPEG plus RAW when I'm shooting in the camera, and I end up processing the RAW image. And I use the JPEG image just as a reference to try to make the RAW look as good as the JPEG, because inherently when you open up a RAW file in a RAW processor, the image looks a little dull, the colors are not quite as brilliant as they are in the JPEG image. And usually we want to get them back more or less to where the JPEG image is. The other thing I should point out is that it's really important to properly expose the image in the camera. You'll notice from my histogram up here that I've pretty much got as good an exposure as I can get in this situation. I don't have any blocking up of the blacks at the low end, and I don't have any significant clipping at the highlights, just beginning to clip a few of the highlights at the high end of the histogram. Mostly all of our tones are spread out nicely across the middle of the histogram. And this is particularly important because if you underexpose any of these images by, say, 2 f-stops in the camera, and then have to increase the exposure 2 f-stops in processing to come up to a normal brightness level, then what happens is you generate a lot. The noise that's generated in the image becomes very dominant, and it's very difficult to remove all that noise. The noise will look overwhelming, and the noise, if you like, particle size looks very large if you bring it up too much. So the best thing to do here is to always try to get a good exposure, and if you're shooting RAW, maybe a slight overexposure when you take the image in the camera. And the idea being that when you bring it into develop mode, that if anything, you want to move the exposure slider to the left a little bit to lower the exposure, or not have to move it much at all. You don't want to have to move it a lot to the right, or you'll generate a lot more noise in the image. And the other thing I want to do is I like to do the noise reduction, at least the initial noise reduction, early, because everything else you do can exaggerate any noise that you currently see in an image, and it makes the noise look like it's 4 or 5 times more of it by the time you're done processing as compared to where you started processing. So let's get started. So now the interesting thing with the JPEG is the way that the Adobe engine processes the JPEG is it initially sets it so that the color slider, the noise reduction slider for color, is initially set at 0. The luminosity reduction slider is set at 0, and the sharpening amount slider is set at 0. All right. I guess on the premise that they've already done as much as they need to do in the camera, so we don't need to do any more noise reduction and then resharpening in processing. However, as you see, when you bring in a raw image here, what happens at least with the Olympus raw images going through the Adobe raw processor, what happens is we start out with by default, it gives us a setting of 25 on the color slider for color noise reduction. It gives us 0 for the luminance slider, but it also gives us a 25 setting, a plus 25 setting for the sharpening amount. Let me blow that up so you can see that easier. Okay, so the color slider by default is at 25, the luminance is 0, and the sharpening is set at 25 as a default setting. So I guess what they're anticipating is that yes, there is color noise that needed to be removed. Luminance noise is up to you to decide how much you need to remove. And the amount of sharpening, they're saying yes, for the amount of color noise we're taking out, we need probably at least 25 setting on the amount of the sharpening to bring back the fine detail as best as we can. So let's look at this image and let's get started if we can. So I'm going to blow up the Ron's face here, and okay, and you can see right now that with the color slider set for the color noise slider set for 25, we're not seeing a lot of color noise. We are seeing noise here. There's a reasonable amount of luminance noise, okay, black and white noise, but not a lot of color noise. Had I brought this color slider all the way down to 0, see, now you pick up a lot of red noise coming up in the dark areas. Okay, there's red noise, there's yellow noise in these dark areas. You can see it here. I think you can also see it over, yeah, there you go. You can see it against that door real easy, that there's a lot of color noise coming in. And it shows up in the blacks. If you look in the black areas, you can see there's a lot of color noise. All right? But, like you said, if all you have to do is go... Oh, and the other thing you notice, I just noticed this recently, that whenever you move one of these sliders, when they're in a default position, they're sort of grayed out. Not totally grayed out, but partially grayed out. But notice when you move it out of the default position, it actually gives you a bright setting, which is a very nice way of knowing that you made a change to the sliders. Because sometimes people go, did I change that slider or didn't I? And this can tell you did. So in this case, I'm going to bring this back to the 25, and see when I do, it grayed it out again. And I'm going to leave it at 25. You see, at 25, pretty much all that noise has disappeared. All right. So it works as a decent setting to get rid of the color noise. And I find consistently that seems to be the case. There's another slider underneath color, which is the detail. This is basically intended to, if by moving the color slider too far, you not only take out the color noise, but you also start losing too much of the detail. You can change this detail slider from its default setting of 50 up to a higher number, and that will try to bring back more detail. Of course, the trade-off here is whenever you bring back more detail, you're going to bring back more of the color noise. So you could use it for fine-tuning, but for the most part, I don't really ever have to move the detail slider off of the 50% setting. For there, and also for the luminance one, you'll notice there's a detail slider there that also is set at 50%. Now we have another slider here, which is the smoothness slider. Again, in most of my images, I haven't seen where that's made any kind of an effect whatsoever. Let's see if we can pick an area and see if we can see it happening. Let me go back over to Ron. So we have his glasses, his eyes, his face. You can clearly see luminance noise here. But if I take that smoothness slider and I move it all the way in one direction, is that an obvious change? It's helped a little bit. Maybe it's smoothed out the skin a little bit, but not a great deal. The idea of this, I think, is to take care of big blotchy areas. If you have blotchy areas, you can try to make them blend in better. If I go all the way in the other direction, all right. But basically, for most of my images, I don't really see an effect to that at all. Yeah. Okay. So the tendency is just to leave the thing at the 50% at its default setting. There's also a contrast slider here. Well, let me do the luminance noise first. So we have the image, and I'm going to increase the luminance slider. And as you do so, you see it will start having a pretty good effect on the noise levels. Let me blow this up even more. We're at 200%. I'll go to 400%. Okay, and let me back that back down to 0. Okay, so you see we have quite a bit of noise here, luminance noise, and as I start bringing that up, depending on how far I bring it up, we can smooth out most of that noise pretty well. All right, certainly by the time I hit 30% or so, I pretty much got it all out. If I go further, all that I'm doing, since the noise is pretty much gone at that point, all I'm doing is smearing out the detail. So I can take it up, all the way. We can make them look very cartoonish, very plastic-looking face. All right, looks like a bad plastic surgeon. And some people then try to take the detail slider and start moving that up to start to bring back some of the detail. And you're sort of, chasing the tail of a cat. It doesn't work too well. So frankly, my preference is usually just to leave that detail slider around 50%, where it started. If I can get it to go back, there we go. And basically just bring up the luminance as much as I need to get rid of most of the noise. And in fact, do I want to get rid of all the noise? Probably not all of it, but I do like to reduce it quite a bit. So in this particular case, I'm going to go right about there, I think, which is a setting of, what, 29. That's for 800 ISO. If you go to higher ISOs, obviously with the camera, my Olympus camera will go up to 25,000 ISO. At that point, I may have to be up to about a setting of 80 on the luminosity slider to knock out most of that noise. Now, the question here is, we got rid of the noise, but how much damage did we do to the sharp areas in the picture, like his glasses? All right, if I go up and turn on, there's a little preview button up here. It used to be called preview in Photoshop, but now if you click on that, it's like an on-off switch. So it's on. The effect is applied at the moment. Okay, I'm turning it off, so that's where we started. You see it brought back the red noise, the color noise, and it brought back all of the luminosity noise. But the question is look at the glasses, the wire rim of the glasses, and see, how much detail have we lost. So that's the detail we started with. Now, admittedly, this was not a tack sharp picture to start with, since I was shooting it in an 80th of a second handheld. But okay, so when I turn it back on, turn it off, turn it back on, we've lost some detail, but we haven't lost a lot of detail in the glasses. All right, so that works pretty well. All right, so now if we're happy with what we did with the color noise reduction at this stage and the luminous noise reduction, then I said I would talk about the contrast slider. There's a contrast slider too, which sort of balances off the ends of the traditional highlight shadow areas instead of the middle of the histogram. And I think that's what this contrast slider is intended to do here. So if I do move it all the way up, okay, it does have a little bit of a subtle effect to the image, but it's not, again, a very dramatic effect, and it's not an effect that can't be overcome by just moving the luminosity slider a little bit more one way or the other. So again, I haven't seen a good explanation of really what that's supposed to do, or anybody that really showed me where it had any significant effect in most images. So I tend to leave that at 0 all the time. Okay, so in essence, for these images, if I accept the 25% for the color slider is for most of my images, I usually don't have to ever move that. The only one I have to do for noise reduction is move this luminosity slider. And you move it higher as you're using higher ISOs is what you find out. Okay, and again, if you underexpose the image, you're going to get a lot more noise, and these numbers are going to be, if I underexpose by an f-stop, instead of using 25 or 28 for the slider, I might have to take it up to 40 to get rid of that excess noise that I got because I underexposed. Okay, so let's go up to the sharpening routine now. Now in the sharpening, like you said, it started out at 25. And again, if I bring that all the way down to 0, okay, now you can see that the glasses have gotten blurry there. If I turn, let's go back. All right, this is basically the way it came out of the camera. So we have the glasses are, okay, got some sharpness to them, but we've got all that noise to get rid of. So if we get rid of the noise, all right, and we got rid of the noise, but it does do significant blurring of the detail of the glasses. So that the initial 25 setting was not a bad setting to start with. In this particular case, I'm going to, again, take it up a little bit at a time, and what I'm doing is I'm watching it get sharper, and I'm hoping this is showing up on the video. Now, the glasses are getting sharper, but you'll notice the noise starts to come back into the cheeks and whatever, compared to where we started. And if I turn that little preview on and off, okay, and try to figure out, well, do we ever get back to the spot where I was happy, without bringing up that sharpness slider? Not really. But I think I need to bring the amount up somewhere around here, which is 39. Let's say a setting of 40, when initially it was a setting of 25. I need to bring it up that amount to get the glasses back to where I think they were more or less in the starting image. All right. Let's try it one more time here. Yeah, that's holding the sharpness pretty good. All right, now, so at this point, the other sliders again rarely need any setting change. It depends in a sense on how big a print you're making. If you're eventually going to make a very large print out of these, you could increase the detail slider a bit. but generally right now we're not in bad shape here with the detail. If I do take it up, it gives a kind of an overall bubbly looking effect to the image. I can show you here by doing that. I'm sorry, I'm bringing up the radius, not the detail, sorry. Okay. You bring up the radius, and it also does add to the haloing that you see around the image. So again, I don't really want to do that to any significant amount. Oops. Get it to go back to where I had it. Okay, so I'm leaving that at a radius of 1, which was this default setting. Now I bring the detail up. That's what I meant to do. Yeah, see how you bring the detail up. It's not like the noise is coming back, but it is adding this overall, like a pattern across the entire image, which is a little bit separate subtly from the noise, but it certainly doesn't look good. And it's okay from a distance, but if you get close to the image to view it, you're really going to find it objectionable. So again, I don't want to change that detail slider if I don't have to. If anything, I might bring it down a little bit, okay? But for the most part, you can get away leaving it where it is in most cases. Now, the key to this is what we've done is we blurred the image by getting rid of the noise. Okay, we brought back the sharpening to some extent by moving the amount slider for the sharpening, but the problem is we started to bring back some of our noise when we did that. So what Adobe has done is they've added this masking slider. And what the masking slider does is it allows you, in essence, to convert it from an overall sharpening of the image to sort of an edge sharpening of the image. Okay, it's similar to the high-pass filter in Photoshop. And so the way this works is you hold down your Alt key and you click on the dial. And what it's showing you when it's white, like with any mask, white reveals and black conceals.
Sorry, but I can only make calls from a phone.
Okay, so basically what we do here is we start moving this slider while we're holding the Alt key down. And as we move it, what happens is you see it's creating a partial mask. Areas that are white are going to have the sharpening effect and the noise reduction effect applied to it. Areas that are black are not going to have the sharpening effect applied to it. They are going to have the noise reduction applied, but not the sharpening. So in this particular case, what do I want to do? I don't want to add any additional sharpening back to his cheeks, okay, or the background. But I do want to add, but I do need to have sharpening for where there's detail in the image, like his eyeglasses, you know, his lips, the tip of his nose, that kind of stuff. So if I take it up all the way, that's probably too much. But I find that typically you want to bring this up into the 70 to 80% range with the mask. All right, if I release the key. Now you see what it did is it keeps the sharpening that we set with the amount slider for the sharpening, but it doesn't start bringing back the noise on the cheeks. So once you've done that, you can actually go in and jack up the amount slider a little bit on the sharpening. All right, and if I do on and off for the preview, okay, you can see the glasses look good there. They look like they haven't lost any detail, and we've gotten rid of a lot of the noise, most of the noise from his cheeks. So it's pretty effective as a technique goes. Traditionally, this is the same approach they used with their unsharp mask in Photoshop, and the problem, like you said, was always that whenever you ran noise reduction, you blurred the image, and then when you ran the sharpening routine, you sharpened the stuff you had just blurred, and so you're bringing back the noise as well as bringing back the detail. This masking feature, this masking slider that they've added, has made it just infinitely easier for us to be able to control the sharpening, to get rid of the noise, but control the sharpening and where it's sharpening, so that we can do edge sharpening and bring back detail to the fine areas of the picture that need to be sharp. All right. So basically, that's really all there is to the image at that point. If you look around the rest of the image, let's see. Even looking over toward the sign here, for example, if I go to where we started, okay, that's where we started, and this is where we went. So you see, we haven't really lost any sharpening where we need it. All right, and the same thing on the other people, I think. If I go over to Clark, okay, again, if we, all right, so you see we had quite a bit of noise showing up there, but we can remove the noise there and we can hold the detail. All right, even if you notice the cinder blocks on the wall behind him here do have, texture of their own, and we don't want to lose that texture. So you see there, we're still maintaining texture in those areas while we've gotten rid of most of the noise. So overall, it's I think a very effective way of doing the sharpening overall in the image. All right. So I'm going to stop at that point and hope that answered your questions on how I process these images.